Welcome to OLC 4.0 Term 2A. This is class number 10, assignment number 13, and we're working on compound and complex sentences today. All right, this is our contact information, student work at nnec.on.ca. Make sure your full name, course name, assignment number, and name are on it. If it asks for a rough and a good draft, please label them both. If you need to ask me any questions about an assignment, just email me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. You can also reach out to me on Facebook if you want, or rewatch older assignment recordings on YouTube. They're both the exact same address, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit today about conjunctions. Conjunctions are a way to join words, phrases, or sentences. There are three main types of conjunctions: coordinating, subordinating, and correlative. We won't get to correlative today. We'll try and tackle that tomorrow. So starting with coordinating conjunctions, these are some of the most common ones that we use. We can connect items at the word level or the phrase level or the sentence level with these. Here, we're connecting them at the word level. So for example, tonight we are eating turkey and mashed potatoes. Becky and Susan are coming over to watch movies. He was handsome, but mean. I would rather swim or read on a hot day. So it works whether you're trying to combine nouns, adjectives, verbs. Then you can also use coordinating conjunctions at the phrase level. So phrases where you have several words in a row, but it doesn't make a complete sentence. So here for the first one, we have the new kitten chased the red laser pointer. So there's our first phrase, chase the red laser pointer, and pounced on the pretend mouse. So we're linking these two phrases that show what she was doing. Okay. She skated with a great deal of speed. So that's kind of a prepositional phrase describing her actions, but without much precision. Okay. They're linked by the word but. I like to read in the park or at the coffee shop. So in the park is your first phrase, or at the coffee shop. I cannot pretend to like your new boyfriend, nor his odd roommate. So we got your new boyfriend as the first phrase, and it's linked with his odd roommate. Okay, so we often don't talk about the phrase level, but it's perfectly valid to use it that way. Just not if somebody was specifically saying, please create a compound sentence, that's all. Okay. However, when we do use coordinating conjunctions at the sentence level, we create compound sentences. Now, remember that each simple sentence can also be called an independent clause. And an independent clause means it's got a verb, it's got a subject, and it makes sense on its own. So to create a compound sentence, you're basically joining two independent clauses to express a complete thought. Each independent clause has to have a subject and a verb. So here are some examples. I love to go skiing, but I hate skating. If I took the word but out, I love to go skiing could stand on its own, and I hate skating can stand on its own. I've joined them together to create a compound sentence. The trees are growing nicely, and the flowers are thriving too. So the trees are my subject, are growing nicely is my predicate. For the second clause, the flowers is my subject, and are thriving too is my predicate. Therefore, I can join it with the conjunction and. All right, that's better. He did not get time to finish planting the garden, nor did he get finished fixing the steps as he had promised. So he is your subject, did not get time to finish planting is your extremely long uh, verb phrase. Now, with the nor, there's an inversion that goes on here, but the word he is still your subject. Get finished fixing is your verb phrase and your predicate. So I can combine them or join them with the conjunction nor. We could go to the new movie at the mall, or we could go ice skating at the arena. So here we've got the subject we, and then our verb could go, and the whole predicate to the new movie at the mall. And then we've got we as our subject, could go ice skating is our verb, and the rest of the predicate is at the arena. And we're joining it with the conjunction or. The reason that we do this is there's multiple reasons. Sometimes we're trying to show a relationship between them. Like, I love to go skiing, but in contrast, I hate skating. Sometimes we're trying to add more information. The trees are growing nicely and the flowers are thriving too. Or is showing our choices. Here's one choice, here's our other choice. Nor is used for negative choices, like when there's two choices and you don't like either one of them. Okay, so it's a way of showing more information just through the use of a very simple word. Okay, moving on to subordinating conjunctions. Now, subordinate conjunctions cannot be used to join words or phrases. You could only use it to join clauses together. Remember, a clause has to have a subject and a verb. So here's a list of some of the possible subordinating conjunctions, just so you kind of know what we're talking about. This is not by any means an exhaustive list. There's lots. These are just some of the most common ones. Words or phrases like than, rather than, as much as, whether, which they've spelled incorrectly, whereas, after, as soon as long as, before, by the time, now that, once, since, until, when, whenever, while, who, whoever, whom, whomever, whose, if, only if, I've even seen even if, unless, provided that, though, although, or even though. So these are used when you're combining an independent clause that can stand on its own with a dependent clause. So what's the difference between a dependent clause and an independent clause? Any clause has to have a subject, which is the noun or the pronoun, and it has to have a verb, which is our kind of our predicate. Okay. An independent clause will make sense all on its own, right? If you didn't add a single other thing, you would understand that sentence. A dependent clause has an incomplete thought that needs another clause to complete it. Generally, because it's already starting with a subordinating conjunction. So here are some examples, like, unless he brings the money. If she says yes. Before you put in the eggs. Once you finish the car. Since you're already mad. And you can see these are what I think of as like a teeter-totter sentence. We've got one side of the teeter-totter or the seesaw, but we're missing the other half. And it doesn't really make any sense without the other half. The thought just isn't finished. Now, if we want to, we can easily add an independent clause to join these dependent clauses and create a complex sentence that does make sense. So this is using the exact same dependent clauses. We've just added something to it to make a complete sentence. Unless he brings the money, I can't buy the groceries. If she says yes, I'm going to marry that girl. Before you put in the eggs, make sure the pan is hot. Once you finish the car, we need to mow the lawn. Since you're already mad, I might as well tell you I am the one who broke the vase. Now, because we started on the previous slide with dependent clauses, all of these sentences start with the dependent clause, okay? And you can tell it's dependent clause because it's got the subordinate conjunction in front of it. We've got unless or if, before, once, or since. So you can see the pattern going here. Here's the thing. This isn't the only pattern you can have. You could move this entire phrase, or sorry, clause, to the end of the sentence instead. So I'm going to do that and kind of show you what I mean. If I put this here, I've got to clean up the punctuation, but I could say, we need to mow the lawn, comma, once you finish the car. Okay, and there you have the subordinate conjunction in the middle, like we're kind of used to seeing the coordinating conjunction. Now, you don't necessarily have to put the comma there. A lot of people don't, and that's fine. Some people just kind of get used to it, so they do put it there. So any one of these, I could switch the dependent clause in the front and put it at the back as long as I moved that subordinate conjunction with it. Both are equally correct. One is not better than the other, just in case you're wondering. Okay. Here, I've got some complex sentences. So that means they've got a dependent clause and an independent clause. And I want you to take a look at them and see which part is the dependent clause. If you're not sure, look for the subordinating conjunction, because that will always be in front. Sometimes they call the dependent clause a subordinate clause. And so the subordinate conjunction comes at the front of the subordinate clause. So looking at the first sentence, we've got, after the game was finished, we went out for pizza. So which part is dependent or incomplete without the rest of the sentence? So if I said we went out for pizza, that's complete all by itself. But if I said after the game was finished, it doesn't make any sense without the rest of the sentence. I did not remember to buy the milk, although I had written it on the grocery list. So I did not remember to buy the milk. That part makes sense by itself. Although I had written it on the grocery list, that part does not make sense by itself. Therefore, it is your subordinate conjunction, sorry, clause, and it starts with the subordinate conjunction. Since he was not there, I was quite upset. So we've got two different parts. Since he was not there, and I was quite upset. Which part can stand on its own? I was quite upset stands on its own, so it's the independent clause. That means since he was not there is our dependent clause or the subordinate clause. Either way, they're both the same. They're just two ways of saying the same thing, basically. Even though I am tired, I will give my best effort. So we've got even though I'm tired versus I will give my best effort. Which one can stand on its own? I will give my best effort. Even though I am tired cannot stand on its own. So that makes it the dependent clause. Basically, it's depending on the other part of the sentence to make sense. I was not satisfied with my performance in the dance competition, even though our team won first prize. So where is the subordinate clause there, or dependent clause? You can see after the comma, even though our team won first prize, it doesn't make sense by itself. It needs the first part of the sentence to make sense. I saw a meteor overhead while I was waiting for my ride to pick me up. Which part is dependent? Which part is independent? I could say I saw a meteor overhead. It makes perfect sense on its own. But while I was waiting for my ride to pick me up has to have more. It is not independent. It is a dependent clause. I went to the snack bar, although I was already full from supper. So which part is dependent and which is independent? I went to the snack bar is independent. It can stand on its own. Although I was already full from supper is dependent. It cannot stand on its own. So a lot of times the subordinating conjunction is trying to show a relationship between the two different sentences or the two different clauses. And it can show different types of relationships. So here's a little chart that shows you some of the different types of relationships. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are lots of subordinating conjunctions that are not on here because there is an enormous number in English. It's really commonly used. So you can show causal relationships. That means like cause and effect. One thing is making the other thing happen. So as, because, in order, so that, now that, since, those are all showing cause and effect relationships. Granting concessions, like you're admitting something like, I felt like you were wrong, although I can see how you have some good ideas, right? As though, even though, just as, whereas, or while. Next group is specifying conditions. In other words, this can happen as long as this other thing happens, or even if, in case, provided, unless. So sometimes it's a negative one, right? Like you can't go to the movies unless Robert's mom calls me and says she's going to pick you up, right? So it can be a positive condition or a negative condition. It can also tell the place, like where something is going to happen, in which case where can become a subordinating conjunction. So can wherever. Signaling temporal relationships. Temporal just means time, okay? So it can talk about the sequence of when one part of the sentence happened versus the other part of the sentence. So there we've got words like after, as soon as long as, before, once, still, till, until, when, whenever, while. Comparisons. Comparisons are when you're basically just comparing two things, one thing to the other, about how they are often similar, or it could be unsimilar, as or as though. You can also set up contrasts. That's definitely showing how things are different. So then you'd use words like though, whereas, while, or although. And you can see some of them show up in more than one category. And that's because they're words that have multiple meanings. And depending on how they're used in the sentence, they may have a slightly different meaning, which I know is unfortunately one of the confusing things about our language, is that some words can do more than one job and mean more than one thing. So here I've got two smaller sentences, and I want to try and join them up with subordinating conjunctions in order to create a complex sentence. And remember that we can put the subordinate conjunction in front of the sentence, or we can put it in the middle of the sentence. So if I wanted to show a place relationship, I've got these two sentences. The soldiers laid the bombs, they could find hiding spaces. So how could I connect those two to suggest a place, right? The soldiers laid the bombs, therefore they could find hiding spots. Oh no, you know what? Maybe wherever. I like wherever because therefore is showing cause, wherever is showing place. Okay, so the shoulders laid the bombs. That makes more sense too. Wherever, oops, they could find hiding spaces. Okay. I will work part-time. The baby is due in June. And I want to connect these using a time relationship. I will work part-time until the baby is due in June, right? Until the baby is due in June. Now you can see here, I've got to get rid of that capital letter because I can't have a capital letter in the middle of the sentence. The plants died. The dogs kept digging in the garden. So I want to show cause and effect. So the plants died because the dogs kept digging in the garden. So that period's going to become a comma. I add the word because, and then I turn that capital into a lowercase. Hang on a second. Okay, looking at the next one, comparison. He woke up refreshed and joyful. He had not been working for 2 weeks straight. So we're trying to compare those. He woke up refreshed and joyful as though, or yeah, I'm going to say as though. I could say because it would work with the words, but it doesn't satisfy the idea of comparison. As though he had not been working for 2 weeks straight. So in this case, he's been working for 2 weeks straight. Why did that go so strange? Hang on a second. Um, but he feels great as if he hadn't been working so much. Contrasts. He wanted to move to a new city. His wife was comfortable in their old city. So they want different things. I could say he wanted to move to a new city, even though his wife was comfortable in their old city. I could also put it at the front. I could say, even though he wanted to move to a new city, his wife was comfortable in their old city. So now I've got to change that period to a comma. I could leave the comma off if I wanted to, but I like putting the comma there, I got to be honest. And then change the capital to a lowercase. His wife was comfortable in their old city. I will make you a nice supper. You pay for all the groceries. So this is a conditional one. How can we show conditions? Um, I will make you a nice supper if if you pay for all the groceries. So again, comma, if, and we turn that capital Y into a small y. And then granting a concession. I will let you borrow the car. You didn't remember to put gas in it last time. Even though you did not remember, even though you did not remember to put gas in it last time. And that one, I don't think it needs a comma. It kind of sounds a little bit weird if I put the comma there. All right, moving on. Our assignment 13. Yesterday we worked on assignment 12, which was writing the rough draft of our news story that's based on the events in chapter 1. And this part is your final copy. So I just want to remind you, if you've handed in your uh, good copy of assignment 12, that's great. Remember that you should make a photocopy or two because you need a good copy of assignment 12 to hand in. And then you need one that it's okay if you write all over to make corrections and changes in editing in order to do assignment 13. Okay. So we're going to be making changes. That is one of the things I'm looking for on your rough draft. And it even says right here, number 1, make a photocopy of your rough draft of your news report from lesson 3. Check your spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Now, they're really not talking about revisions, which we are going to talk about a little bit, using the writing process. It should have all kinds of editing marks and revisions on it, okay? That is worth 10 marks. So if you hand me in the photocopy and there's no changes, I can't give you the marks. You've got to show me that you've made changes. Number 2, assuming that you're satisfied with your revised and edited rough copy of your news report, then you're to produce a final copy or what's called a good copy. Make sure it looks neat, it's error-free, and it sounds good. You're also going to want to make sure it meets the criteria we're going to talk about next. You have to make sure it still includes all the criteria that we mentioned in assignment 12. It has to have a deadline, a headline. It has to have a date. It has to have a graphic. When it's missing those things, you can lose significant numbers of marks. And some people get very frustrated by that, but you have to follow the criteria. So here is the original criteria. The headline is short and catches the reader's attention. A date is included in the report. Usually it's the very first thing. You tell me who is the story about, what, when, where, and why. You explain how the event is happening. You give quotes that are thoughtful and appropriate to the event. And you show me a level of detail that shows considerable understanding of the event. Some people don't write enough or they don't give enough details, and it's hard to know if they really fully understand it if you don't give me enough details. All right, here is the rubric that I will actually use to mark it. And I'm assuming people understand rubrics, but just in case, a rubric is just a fancy kind of marking scheme where I can look at each element of your essay differently. So I can look at knowledge and understanding, thinking and inquiry skills, communication skills, and application skills. If you're demonstrating limited knowledge of the event, that's a D. Some knowledge is a C. Considerable is a B, and thorough is an A. Thinking and inquiry. If you're demonstrating limited evidence of thinking skills, that's a D. Some evidence of thinking skills is a C. Considerable evidence of thinking skills is a B. And excellent evidence of thinking skills is an A. Communication. Here we're looking at full sentences, proper paragraphs, grammar, creativity, that kind of thing. Again, limited skills shows me a level D. Some skills shows me level C. Considerable shows me B. And thorough shows me level A. The last one is where I'm looking to see that you understand how to write a news story. We spent a lot of time talking yesterday on the criteria for a news story as compared to, say, a summary or a journal. If you're not sure or if you missed that, make sure to go back and check on it because it's a big part of what I'm looking for when I mark this. So includes the headline, the date, the graphic, the 5 W's and the H, includes quotes, transfers your writing skills to the context of a news report with limited success, transfers those skills with some success. B, transfers it with considerable success. And finally, transferring it with excellent success. So this is the rubric that I use to mark your news reports, both assignment 12 and assignment 13. Okay, the revising stage. So at this point, the big part of assignment 13 is revising. And I think this is the most important step, but I also think it's probably the most misunderstood stage of writing. Sometimes I think people must think it means copy your work in really neat handwriting. Because sometimes I'll get people hand me in something and there's not a single word different. It's just really neat. Or the first one was in handwriting and the second one is typed, but they haven't made any changes at all. But that is not what I'm looking for. Revising is where you look over the rough draft and you see how you can polish up the words, the sentences, the punctuation, and all those things to make it sound even better. Okay. There are literally hundreds of ways to improve your work, and we're going to be talking about them throughout the course. So I'm just going to mention some of the biggest ones for right now. Okay. So here is an example of what I'm talking about. The first one is done in handwriting. That would be your assignment 12. And the second part over here is assignment 13. But if you take a careful look, they've really not made many changes. The only thing they've really done, they've changed the to this, small h for his to a big H, and they took off the small b and made it a big B so they could make a whole new sentence. That's not really enough to be worth 20 marks difference, right? So you can see my little sad face over here. Oh, it's sad because there's not enough changes. Okay, over here. Here is still your original assignment 12. And over here, we're working on our new and improved. I don't get the whole thing because I don't have enough room, but here's an example. So my original says, this is my news story about chapter 1 in the book. Jimmy comes home. Jimmy's on the plane flying home, but he does not want to be there at all. He gets scared when he sees the RCMP and the police at the airport. His probation officer is able to calm him down, but Jimmy is convinced that he's not really welcome here and that they are looking for a way to send him home. So that's assignment 12. Now, here I have, let me give it a color just so I can talk about it. Here I have in the yellow my revised assignment 13. The big thing I see with assignment 12 is it sounds a little bit more like a summary or like a book report. Like I'm talking about the book, but I'm not making it sound like a news report that you would read in an actual newspaper like the Sioux Bulletin or the Chronicle Journal in Thunder Bay. So that's the big thing I'm working on, is trying to make it sound more like a news report. Officials stand at the airport waiting for a community youth to arrive back home. There was some delay in disboarding, which a pilot later reported to be due to the passenger refusing to get off the plane once he saw the police officers out front. Now, again, I've only covered basically the very first paragraph there. I'm not finished. I need to do a bunch more work. But here is some of the changes I've made. I've revised the format, like basically how I write, to make it sound like it's more of a news story. I changed the tone. It's a little more formal. It's a little more serious. I've tried to sound a little more objective, more like a news story. The other big thing is I've tried to limit myself to facts that a reporter would actually know. When we're reading the novel, we're kind of seeing things a little bit from Jimmy's eyes. But if the reporter isn't in the room or the plane or whatever that Jimmy is in, he's not going to know all the things that Jimmy knows unless somebody tells him, like here, the pilot told him something. But of course, how the pilot saw things is very different than how Jimmy might report it. That's a big part of a news report here, is that it's not going to sound like a summary, and it's not written from Jimmy's point of view. It's written from a stranger's point of view, basically. Okay. Big thing, have I followed the news article format? Have you remembered to answer the questions who, what, where, and when in your lead paragraph? Remember, that's the beginning. Should be like 1 or 2 sentences that answer all the important things at once. It doesn't matter if it's out of order, right? Remember, with a news article, what's most important comes first, not whatever happened first. Is the tone formal like a news article should be, or does it sound casual like I'm talking to a friend? Have I written from the reporter's point of view only and not included anything that he wouldn't know unless someone else had told him? Finally, have I put the most important information first in my lead, and then items of medium importance, and finally any items of less importance? That would be the inverted pyramid. When you're beginning to do your revising, one of the first things you want to check is my meaning clear? Like if somebody else were to read this, does it make sense to them? A lot of times if we're writing, we don't notice that we've dropped words or sentences, or we were about to write something and then we went to grab a cup of coffee and we came back, we forgot we didn't write it. But then when someone else goes to read it, it just sounds confusing. One of the best ways to check that is, well, first of all, you can read to someone else and they can tell you if there's problems. But the other way is if you read it out loud, sometimes the problems become more obvious when you say it out loud than if you're just reading silently, okay? Here are some of the most common problems in conveying what you mean, and these are pretty easy to fix. So sometimes people are too vague. Like if you just said Brian was upset by all his problems, doesn't really tell me what's going on. But I could easily fix this by adding details. Brian was upset because of so many things: his failed exam, his pregnant girlfriend, and now his parents were yelling at him. Now I understand why Brian's so upset. The other thing is sometimes people are repetitive or redundant. They'll say the same thing twice in a sentence, or they'll say the same thing in one sentence and then kind of the same in the next sentence. So here's an example. In my opinion, in my belief, he should have gone home. Those are really saying the same thing. I can get rid of one of them. So I could just say, in my opinion, he should have gone home. Okay. It's just saying the same thing and over. We don't need that. Too many pronouns. If you don't put people's names and just use he, she, a lot of times, especially if there's a lot of people in the story, you begin to lose track of who's being talked about. So here's an example. After he told him about the affair, he was mad at her. Well, who told who and who is he mad at? It's confusing. So you've got to try and use their names at least once in the sentence. After Dave told him about the affair, Pete felt mad at Susan. And if I thought that was too confusing, I could even say, after Dave told Pete about the affair, Pete felt mad at Susan. So pronouns are fine as long as you're sure your reader knows who you're talking about. Okay, sentence fragments. This is one of the other things is I'm seeing a bit of these where people have forgotten part of a sentence. Remember that a sentence has to have three things. It has to have a subject, which is who or what the sentence is about. It has to have a predicate, which means a verb plus some other words explaining what's happening. It must be a complete thought. If it is missing any one of those things, it is considered incomplete or a fragment. Fixing these are really pretty simple. You just have to add the missing part to the sentence. So if I had a sentence that said, went to the store, well, what's wrong with that? Basically, it's missing the subject. How could I fix it? That's easy. Add a subject. And all I need to do in there is he went to the store, she or dad, whoever it is, I add that information. The old red truck. What is wrong with that sentence? It's missing the predicate. All I have to do is add a predicate, which would be a verb plus some other words that explain what's happening. The old red truck drove down the street. Last one here, after I go. Well, that one has a subject, I, and it has a verb, go, but it's incomplete. Remember we talked about the seesaw sentences? After I go is one part of your seesaw, but it needs another part, okay? We need to add a main clause to create a complete thought. After I go, please do the dishes. One really common time that people create sentence fragments is when they're trying to create emphasis. And I want to point out, I know you will see this in novels, right? Authors use it all the time for dramatic effect in novels. But in this kind of writing, school writing or newspaper writing, it's really not considered appropriate. So by all means, if you're working on a story in your spare time, you are welcome to use it there, but not for this kind of school writing, okay? I should never have gone there, period. Not with him. Now, not with him makes sense. Like I get what you're saying. If you said that to me out loud, I would totally understand what you're talking about. But in writing, it doesn't make sense because there's no subject or verb, so it cannot be a sentence on its own. I can fix it different ways, right? I can make it part of the main sentence, like, I never should have gone there, at least not with him. Now, I could also try using a dash. Remember how we use dashes for dramatic effect? I never should have gone there, dash, not with him. Okay. Either one of those is acceptable and is a way to get your dramatic effect without getting a sentence fragment. Okay. The other big thing, and I talk about this a lot, and I'm going to continue because it is still the most common mistake, is run-on sentences. Run-on sentences are where people join sentences together, often many sentences, without using proper punctuation. I often think it might be used because we're used to doing Facebook or messenger text where it seems like we don't really use periods that much. We use the commas a lot. But again, in school writing or what's called academic writing, it's not really considered appropriate. Okay. Casual writing between your friends, more like a conversation, that's fine. But in academic writing, we need to make our sentences clear. So usually there's two main ways I see people doing the run-on sentences. One is they use a comma instead of a period for a sentence. I was glad to try going back to school. It was a chance for a new start. I can't wait to finish, then I can get a promotion at work. So this person has joined about 4 smaller sentences together into one big giant sentence. And it makes it hard to follow if people do that all the time. How do you fix it? First of all, I could just fix it by putting periods instead. Okay. Remember that if you do that, the word after that period has to have a capital letter because it is now the beginning of a new sentence. So here's an example. I was glad to try going back to school, period. It was a chance for a new start, period. I can't wait to finish, comma, then I can get a promotion at work. That one is actually okay, right? It's okay to join two sentences together. There's also a conjunction there. So that one is fine. Taking a look here. The other way that people sometimes write a run-on sentence is they join a whole bunch of sentences together with conjunctions. The really common ones are and, though, and then. Sometimes I'll see so. And it would be okay if you only joined two. Oh, this one's been fixed. Only joined two sentences together. Okay. But if you join more than two, it starts to sound very long-winded and it's hard to keep track of what's going on. My apologies. I think I must have fixed this last time and I forgot to unfix it. The original said something like, first we went to the fair in Dryden, and when we got there, we parked our car. And then we walked around for some time. And then we went on some rides. And then we went to look at the animals. And then we ate some hot dogs. And then we got tired and went home. Okay. If I were going to fix that, I would go through, I would find all the ands, I would find all the thens, and I would put periods there. Once you've done that, you may find you want to join the sentences in a different way. And usually you can see there's kind of a repetition thing going here. We went to the fair in Dryden. We parked our car. We walked around. We went on some rides. We went to look at the animals. This person is kind of basically using the same simple sentence over and over, and maybe they're not noticing because they're joining them together. What I would do at this point is I would go back and try to make these sentences more interesting. First of all, who is we, right? Is everybody going on the rides? Maybe somebody went on the roller coaster, but mom was scared. Maybe a little brother went on the in the fun house, but screamed and left. Maybe somebody puked on one of the rides. A lot of times you're kind of talking fast in this way, like summarizing things. And if you slow down and begin to tell me some more details, it will often fix the problem. Okay, so here is, all right, yeah, these ones got mixed up. Here was the original. And then here was the fixed one. First, we went to the fair in Dryden. When we got there, we parked our car. We walked around for some time. We went on some rides. We went to look at the animals. We ate some hot dogs. We got tired and went home. Like I said, I would still want to fix that if that was my sentences, because I keep moving them around. My apologies. It just sounds, every sentence sounds the same, right? Which gets kind of tedious to read. Okay, after you've got your assignment so that it sounds the way you want it to sound, then you would tackle the editing stage. And the editing stage is the really fussy stuff, right? It's things like, have you put capitals in the right spots? Have you used the correct formats of different words, the right past tense, the right current tense, the right subject verb agreement, that kind of stuff. Have you used punctuation correctly? Are things spelled correctly? All those kind of fussy things. You're not losing a lot of marks for that kind of stuff, but sometimes if there's a lot of those kind of mistakes, it can get hard to understand what you mean. So if you fix those things up, it can really help your reader understand more easily what you're writing. Okay. So kind of going over some of the fussy stuff right now. Capitalization rules. Now here I'm going like super crazy thorough. I'm probably not ever going to go quite this thorough again, but here are all the places we generally use capital letters in English. At the beginning of a name, at the beginning of a sentence, to write the word I, for the names of months and days, for titles like Mr., Mrs., Ms., Doctor, for the names of a street, for the names of businesses, for the titles of books or movies or games, for the names of places like towns, cities, reservations, provinces, states, countries, continents, for the names of a body of water like Atlantic Ocean or Abram Lake or the Detroit River, for monuments or buildings that have specific names. Or not all buildings have names, but some do, like the CN Tower, Massey Hall, Victoria Inn. For the name of airports, train station, and bus stations. Again, they don't always have a name, but for example, in Toronto, one of the airports is called Pearson, the other airport is called Billy Bishop. If you told somebody, meet me at the airport, they wouldn't know which one you want, and they're very far apart. So that would be a problem. For the names of parks. Again, not every park has a name, but a lot of parks do. And if it's mentioned, then you should mention it and put a capital at the beginning of the title. Also, for the names of natural landmarks, such as mountains, canyons, valleys, and deserts. And again, not every mountain is going to have a name, but a lot of them do. Think of like Mount Everest. So the M would have a capital and Everest would have a capital as well. Okay. Usage is kind of a catch-all phrase, and it really indicates basically any kind of grammar error. And we haven't talked a lot about this kind of stuff, so I'm not going to worry about this too much. As we go along and your writing gets better, because I guarantee you it will by the end of this course, you're going to notice your own grammatical errors, okay? Don't worry about seeing them or panic or anything. I consistently find errors in my own work, especially if it was work I rushed through or I was distracted. Don't be bothered, just kind of fix them and move on. Again, it's not something that causes you to lose a lot of marks. It's just sometimes it can affect how the reader understands what you're writing. Okay, only have a few minutes left. Don't forget basic punctuation, periods, exclamation points, question marks. Some clues that a sentence is a question is if it starts with the 5 W's. Who, what, when, why, where, or how. There's also some question words that if they're the first word in the sentence, it's a really strong possibility it might be a question. Things are like are, is, am, was, were, do, did, have, like, are you coming too? Was my brother there with you? Do you have an extra comb? Okay. Those can also be in the negative, like weren't, didn't, haven't. Haven't you already given him $20? Weren't you planning to change before you went out dancing? That kind of thing. Punctuation, commas. I don't remember if we've talked about commas a whole lot. They're, I think they're one of the trickiest things to use just because there's so many different places we can use them. So for one thing, they can separate the words in a date. Monday, comma, August 15th, comma, 2023. They can separate the words in a list. Please buy eggs, comma, flour, comma, milk, comma, and bread. You can also separate the words in an address, like the street from the town. 34 Front Street, comma, Sioux Lookout, comma, Ontario. You can use it to separate adjectives. I saw a beautiful old big house. You can use it to separate two simple sentences or main clauses in a compound sentence. I love to ride bikes and I love to swim. You can also use it to separate introductory material that comes before the main clause. Things that are often like the transition words or the time words, like yesterday, I went to the store. If I wanted to buy the car, I needed more money. Punctuation marks. We do have to use quotation marks in this news article. So I'm going to just kind of quickly talk about punctuation marks. It's probably the last thing I'll have time to get to before we close. Whenever you want to quote exact words someone has said, you need to put beginning and ending quotation marks around their words like this. And when I was young, I was taught the first part is a 66, the end part is a 99. And often we will add what's called a tag to tell the reader who is talking and how they're saying it. Okay. So John is my who, and how he's saying it said is kind of your ordinary said. And then we put a comma, and then we would introduce the sentence. John said, the concert is tonight. If the tag comes first and the quotation comes second, and the quotation uses a period, we put the period inside the quotes. Okay. If there was a question mark or an exclamation point, it would also be inside the quotes. Okay. However, if we switch it around and the quote is first and the tag is second, it might be different. So pick me up at 8 o'clock. We're going to use a comma. If we put a period there, it looks like we have two mini sentences. Pick me up at 8 is one sentence, and Beth said is the other. So we just put a comma there and people know what it means. If it's a question mark or an exclamation point, that's fine. It's not the same punctuation twice, and people generally understand what it means. So are you coming? Question mark, mom said, or help me, dad screamed. Those are all fine. Okay, I'm not going to go any farther. Please do make sure that if you forgot to do a quote for assignment 12, you do need to make sure there's a quote for assignment 13. If you have any questions, by all means, send me a message and I'd be happy to get back to you and help you with this. Thank you so much for coming out. And tomorrow we'll meet up and talk about assignment 14 and probably 15. Any questions before I close? Nope. Okay, I'm going to move on then. Goodbye, everybody.